In this video, we're going to be discussing how to find movable C major chords all along the neck of the guitar. So, in order to do this, we need to first know what are the three notes that create a C major chord. Those are the first, third, and fifth degrees of the C major scale, which are C, E, and G. Next, we're going to take sets of 3 strings each on the guitar and figure out what those chord shapes will be. So, to start, we're going to start with the G, B, and high E string. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each string and we're going to figure out what notes belong in the C major chord, which again are C, E, and G, and apply them to the guitar. So it'll look a little something like this. So we're going to take our G string and we're going to ask ourselves, okay, is G in the C major chord? It is. So the open G string will be part of the first chord shape. Next, we look at the B string. Is B in the C major chord? No, so we have to look at the next available note, which is going to be C. Lastly, we're going to look at the high E string and again ask ourselves, is the high E string, or the E note in general, in the C major chord? And yes, it is. So far we have our C, E, and G with that first shape. Next, we're going to move up each one of those notes to the next available note in the C major chord. So in this case, C will go to E, E will go to G, and G will go to C. So on the G string, we're going to move it up to the C note. Next, we're going to take the C note on the B string and move it up to the E note. Lastly, we're going to take the high E string, we're going to move that up to the G note. So we get this shape, which is C, E, and G. Lastly, we're going to figure out the last shape, which is going to be moving the C note up to the E, E note up to the G, and the G note up to the C. So we get this shape. Now if you were to continue this pattern, we would go past the octave and we would get up to the octave for the G string, the 13th fret for the B string, that C note, and then the 12th fret for the E note, which is the exact same shape as the first one we did. Now if you think about this, this makes a whole lot of sense, because if the C major chord has 3 notes in it, and each note has to take its own turn being in a specific place, whether on the G string, B string, or high E string, we're going to get 3 unique shapes that are going to repeat themselves throughout every octave. Now, let's go through the other strings and see what shapes they have. Now before we do the shapes for the low E, A, and D string, we have to talk about something real quick. So even though E is in the C major chord, for these shapes we're going to have to do the G note on the low E string. If we did the low E string just as an open one, we would get some shapes that wouldn't be possible. We would get the first one being E, C, and G, then we would get G, E, and C all the way up here. So for these shapes to work, we have to start on the G note of the low E string. Now as you can see from that last shape, it makes a whole lot of sense why we have to start with the G note on the low E string, because that last shape, E, G, and C, wouldn't be possible to play using our open low E string, because those would be notes that would exist beyond what our string allows, technically behind what our string allows. So, what's the significance of this entire exercise? The significance is to understand the multiple places on the neck of the guitar where you can play a major chord. Every single one of these shapes is movable. So for instance, if we take the C major chord that was here, if we move it up a whole step, we get a D major chord. This helps you navigate the neck much better. Now lastly, we have to talk about what these are called. Now these are called inversions, and in a very technical sense, there are specific names for these inversions. So if we take the C major chord started on the C note on the A string, that would be called our root inversion because we have C as the lowest note. When you go up to the next one with E as the lowest note, that would be our first inversion. And lastly, when we get up to the shape that has G as our lowest note, that would be second inversion. Now, the really interesting thing when it comes to music analysis, especially if you were to study music theory, music history, is that it doesn't necessarily matter what the order of the top notes are. It only matters what the lowest note is in order to classify it as a specific inversion. So, for instance, let's take this shape right here, the first one that we did. So, based on what I just said, this would be a second inversion because G is the lowest note. Now, if I add C right here, then it's a root inversion. It doesn't matter what order the top ones are, it only matters what the lowest one is.